On the Japanese charts, we were the USS Pennsylvania. And we got some early attention. I was at my locker, this general alarm sounded, as you've heard on in the movies, and we all, due to our training, which saved my life that time, headed for our battle stations. They said, the announcement said, Japanese planes are bombing Ford Island. And that's where the battleships were moored, right against Ford Island. So I ran for my battle station. I ran out of the compartment up on the main deck. And I ran to the main deck, and I started up to the second deck because my station was on a machine gun about 3 decks above the main deck. And as I reached for the ladder to go to the second deck, the torpedo hit right under where I was standing. And the torpedo exploded, and there was an old ship moored right outside of us, tied up to us outside of us. And the torpedo went under the Ogallala. It was an old mine layer, hollow. And she eventually sunk, and they towed her out of the way so we could shoot from that direction. Anyway, as I came up the ladder, I held onto the ladder, and as the torpedo hit right beneath where I was, all I got was oil and water. And there were about 5 men who were following me that I remember of, who survived, and there were about 30 men just behind me who didn't survive. And I ran to my battle station, and we began firing, and one of our loaders was missing, and he came up, but he was burned black. He had been in the fire, and the uniform of the day was white shorts and t-shirts, which is not real good to fire, conducive to being fireproof. And he was, I guess as they say, walking dead man walking. So he was deceased. When we started firing, we were one of the first ships to start firing. We started firing at the enemy, and we were credited eventually with shooting down, or helping to shoot down, I suppose, 6 Japanese planes. But I want you to imagine when I came up on deck and got to my gun and the planes started coming in, they had to fly over us to drop their torpedoes onto the battleships. And they had practiced this for a long time, and there's a large Japanese population, of course, in Oahu, in Hawaii, and they had spies everywhere, and the spies had told them all they needed to know, and they knew all the depths, and they knew what the buoys were in the harbor, what they meant. They knew everything. And so they had practiced. I've read their version of the attack since then. And they had practiced the torpedo drop because the harbor was only 40 feet deep. And normally a torpedo would just fall into the mud. So they devised and practiced with little wooden brackets that they put on the back of their torpedoes, so when the torpedoes hit the water, that they would not go directly down. It would lift them up, keep them from diving. And they were very effective. I just came from last weekend, a reunion of the people from the USS Oklahoma in Oklahoma City. There were 5 survivors there. And some of the survivors from the Oklahoma City were at Pearl Harbor were transferred to my ship, the Helena, and therefore I knew quite a few of those fellows. And if you've seen the pictures, you've probably seen in the movies too, and lots of newsreels and things. The Oklahoma took 7, and I think one of the survivors I talked to claimed there was 9 torpedoes. She was in the middle of Battleship Row, and she rolled over, and there were men trapped inside her. And after the attack, which we'll go back to, after the attack, there were men trapped inside, and there was 12 inches of armor plate on the Oklahoma turned up, and there were men trapped inside, and there was oil and water also inside flooding. And 2 of my fellow shipmates that I knew later, one of them escaped about 16 hours later. They got them out. but they couldn't use torches to burn through 16 inches of steel without setting fire to the people below and the oil and water below. Nor could they do much chipping with chipping hammers, which we only had then. So there were people knocking on the bottom, wanting people to come and rescue them. And the last knocking was heard Christmas Eve. 14 days, just about 14 days or more. People were trapped and were never saved. And they lost 429 men. Now, if you want to think about sacrifice, think a little bit about that. We started shooting and did well. And I was doing pretty good. And everybody said, well, were you mad? Were you scared? Well, I think we were mad. Because we had been surprised and we were really mad. And but we couldn't do anything except defend ourselves. So we defended ourselves. And but if you can picture Okinawa, if you can picture Oahu and the battleship row and how much room, how much of that area was, that wasn't a very big area. That whole area around Fort Island and the Navy Yard and the sub base, that wasn't a very big area. But there were 316 airplanes launched from the carrier to attack that area. 316 airplanes attacking that small area. And I've tried to describe it in my relating these stories, and it's kind of like bumblebees. We were just looking for whatever we could see and shooting at it. And we were really surprised. I was, and for a long time I wondered if I had dreamed it. But as we were in a sort of a lull, some 2-engine bombers flew over, 3 formations of 5 bombers, and started dropping 500-pound bombs. And our gun was almost a 1-inch, fired almost a 1-inch projectile out of our range. And so all we could do was watch. Well, the Pennsylvania, headed some dry dock, didn't get much damage, but there were 2 destroyers ahead of her, and there's a good picture of that over here. They were demolished and by the bombs, and they were falling right in line with where we were. And I claimed that I swallowed a 500-pound bomb. I was looking up and watching it all the way down, and we were high up on the ship, and it was tied to the dock, and it missed me about 10 feet and went down into the dock and exploded, and didn't really do a lot of damage, but except to me. I was really shocked by the fact that I came that close. Anyway, one of the things we weren't trained for was that we never fired our 5-inch anti-aircraft battery up by this automatic machine gun I was on at the same time, because they had long range, we had short range. And when we were short range, we would back off, and they would fire right by our gun. So our trainer and one of our loaders, and all of us got burned, sunburn, bad sunburn I got, and 2 of them were burned pretty bad. We had to replace them. And so the bombers were something that I didn't read about or hear about much, but they really stuck out in my mind. Then the evening came. This went on for about 2 hours. It was chaos. There was fire on the water, there were explosions, there was everything happening in that small area. And people were swimming to different ships, drowning in fiery water. And they tried to rescue some of them and did rescue some. And the lull came. We started trying to pull things together, trying to find out what was happening next, because we'd had lulls and they hadn't lasted long. And we found out later that the Japanese admiral had decided not to make a second attack. And that was a bad judgment on his side, his time, because he didn't get our oil supply or ammunition. He dumped. And so We were standing there, all wounded ship, people in shock, I suppose. And then the radios started talking, the radios from the Japanese spies, and they were broadcasting troops were landing on Oahu. They were landing at Barbers Point Air Force Base, and they were landing in Waikiki, and we didn't know the difference. And we were just waiting. Then the time was really anxious. So none of that ever happened, by the way, but it didn't happen. But it very well could have. So we did survive that, and I'm sure you have some questions about it. I'm sure I've left something important out. But if you have any questions, I'd like to entertain them at this time. And then I would like to share with you just a little bit more about the war, World War II. And I would tell you this to start with. We're talking about World War II. We're not talking about Iraq. We're not talking about Afghanistan. We're not talking about Korea. And we're not talking even about Vietnam. We're talking about World War II, which was a world war. More than 7 million people died during World War II. Think about that. Okay? I take some questions. Do you have any questions? Yes, sir.
What class of ship was the Helena?
The Helena was a light cruiser.
How many feet?
Huh?
How many feet was she?
How many what?
Feet.
Oh, feet. 600 feet long and 60 feet wide.